Well, as Father alluded to at the beginning of Mass, we're coming to the end of the liturgical year. Next Sunday is the 34th Sunday in Ordinary Time. You ever notice how every year it always ends up on the 34th Sunday? That's actually planned. It's not an accident. And as we come to it, you've noticed the readings over the last couple of weeks have been more leaning towards the end of times, what's happening, judgment and things like that. And today is especially true in that. And the first reading in the Gospel are considered to be apocalyptic writing. And particularly Daniel, but even Mark 13, the whole Mark 13 is considered apocalyptic writing. It's referred to as the little apocalypse. And the readings generally are apocalyptic literature, as even the historical or the mystical. And what we're seeing today is from the historical area. And generally, apocalyptic writings flourish in a time of great crisis. And Daniel is seeing this, and I'll get into that a little later, and so is Jesus and Mark, for that matter. And it provides an overview of the current situation for the community to which they're writing their particular material. And it's often followed by judgment and a vision of the end time. And it's more giving people hope for the future and that things will turn out even though it's difficult right now. The first reading, it's an interesting story from Daniel. It was probably written in about the 2nd century before Christ. And it was probably written by a pious Jew. And the situation he was facing is that Alexander the Great had conquered this area in 320 BC. And then when he died, they divided all his winnings to three different generals. And the Seleucids took over the area of Israel, Syria, Jordan, and that area. And the general in charge, what he was trying to do was make everybody to be Greek and change everything, do away with their culture, do away with everything, follow the Greek gods, follow the Greek things. And this is referred to as Hellenization. They were trying to Hellenize them. Well, the Jews had a very strong culture, and they weren't really willing to do this. But the Hellenists, or the generals, were forcing them. And then if you read the books of Maccabees, you'll see tortures that were done to force people, and it didn't work. And the persecution, as I said, was often violent, and it threatened the faith and culture of the Jewish people to the point where they erected a god, I think it was to Zeus, in the temple, which was an abomination to the people. And what arose was a rebellion, the Maccabean rebellion, and eventually they were able to defeat the Greeks and were allowed to practice their religion untouched by those. The Romans never tried to make the Jews change, and I often wonder if they read their history and said, it's not worth, trying to convert these people. They're pretty much set in their ways. Good move by the Romans. And today's gospel is from Mark 13, and we're reading just the last part of it. And what's leading up to this is over the last, we don't see it, but if you read the whole Mark 13, you'll notice that it's his community is being persecuted, and it's probably in Rome, and it's being persecuted by not only the Romans, but also by the Jews, because there was a conflict between the Jews and the Christians on what it means to be a true Jew, a true follower of Jesus. But then the Roman government was persecuting them. The Romans allowed the Jews to practice their religion because it was an ancient and established religion. But this Christian thing was new, and they didn't like it, and they didn't want it. And worst of all, the Christians did not worship the emperor. They worshiped God, somebody above the emperor. And of course, the Romans thought the emperor was God. And the Christians said, no, he's not. And Jesus Christ is the Son of God, and therefore we worship him. This did not sit well with the Romans, as you might imagine. But earlier in Mark 13, Jesus predicts the great tribulations. And they were there would be those who would impersonate him, and it probably didn't stop at that point. I think it's been going on for 2,000 years. There'll be wars, earthquakes, storms, and famines. Well, we clearly see those still going on a regular basis. Although one could argue there's earthquakes in places that they've never been before, and the storms seem to be getting worse and worse. And famine, if you keep up in the news, you look at places like the Sudan, Gaza, famine is breaking out, and it's a terrible situation. And persecutions and family divisions, and again, we see all these today. there were wars against being led astray by false messiahs, or Jesus is preaching against false messiahs. And at the time of Jesus and the time of Mark, there were many messiahs that claimed that they were the ones that were leaders, and prophets that were prophesying. And I would say today we still have people who say that only I can fix this, or only I am the prophet. We have a number of Christian religions that claim to be the true speakers of it. We think we are, and that's why I'm here, because I think we're right. But anyway, and this will lead to cosmic events. And Jesus says, when it all comes to an end, the sun will not shine, the moon will not be bright, the stars will fall from the sky, and everything is going to fall apart. But Jesus is telling us, his advice is to have total confidence in God and be constantly vigil. You know, he uses that when you see the flowers on the fig tree, you know that summer's coming. When you start seeing some of these things, you know the end times are coming. They've been coming for 2,000 years, and we're still working on it. Today, in today's world, most of the signs Jesus listed, as I said, exist today. You know, as I said, earthquakes are taking place in places that didn't have them before. Oklahoma's had a number of earthquakes. That was never before. I think Pennsylvania is, and not to get political, but it appears that those are the places where fracking is taking place, and there is some speculation that fracking is causing earthquakes in places that shouldn't be there. I often say, don't mess with nature. Whatever you do, don't mess with nature. Storms are more violent. I mean, you only have to watch the news to see the hurricanes ripping through Florida and North Carolina. And if you watch in the Pacific, the typhoons there have gotten far worse. Typhoons are always stronger than hurricanes, and they're far worse now than they were, 20 or 30 years ago. And of course, we all know about the forest fires, and we're even having them in our area. We used to think that was a California thing, that only they had the forest fires, but now they've got them in Pennsylvania, New Jersey. I think we've even got a couple in Maryland. And so things are getting worse and worse and worse. Although fortunately there's no world war, but there are lots of wars going on throughout the world. And clearly most of you are familiar with families that have divisions. So a lot of the things that Jesus was talking about are going on in our world today. And what are we to do? Well, I think the second reading, the readings we've had from Hebrews over the last several weeks, really are talking about the high priest, Jesus. That Jesus is the one who we need to turn to at this time. He's the high priest. He has sacrificed his life. He doesn't have to sacrifice anything more, but we are to follow him. And we're not to follow the false messiahs and prophets who say only they have the answers. And this, of course, is a difficult question, because a lot of people, sit there and say, oh, I follow this fellow, or I follow this fellow, and they really believe in it. And that's a hard thing to get them to change. But all of you here, I hope, are following Jesus Christ and the teachings of the Catholic Church, that we think, and I fully believe, that we are speaking the true words of Jesus. We must turn to those who have been blessed, often through education, with tools to guide us. And I'm thinking in the physical world, the people who have see these problems happening and have solutions, and yet there's a whole book I purchased. It's called The End of Expertise, and it's basically people turning away from the experts. And some of you may disagree with me on this, and that the experts may not have the answers, but they come, to my mind, come closer to understanding the problem in order to get the answer. We are all called to have faith and confidence in the tools God has given us. And God has given us, through our baptism, we receive the Holy Spirit into our lives. And the Holy Spirit should guide us in the decisions we make, the prophets we follow, and the one and only Messiah that's out there that will lead us the way. At the end of the gospel, we are reminded that Jesus' words will not pass away. We must discern the true prophets who speak for Jesus.